Taking a while. It's like Google's down too. Oh, finally. All right, guys. So welcome to chapter 2, and hopefully chapter 3 we'll get through today as well. All right. So you guys are seeing this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many?
Yep.
Good. So how many people were able to go through chapter 2 and 3? It's about 3 or 4 people. I know yesterday was a bit of a madhouse. All right. So chapter 2 is really going to be looking at the the journey of how leadership studies evolved in the past, and what we're going to be really looking at is the different approaches to how leadership was studied um, over time, the time frame in which this text is going to cover us. It goes pretty detailed. I don't know if anybody looked at it, and it looked at all of the different models that were developed and have been developed, I should say, over time. Did anybody find anything of note to them, or anything that ran true to them in terms of the nature of leadership and its study?
One thing that kind of stuck in my memory was that they say leadership is the most observed phenomena, but least understood.
Yes. Well, I have that quote there. Yep. And it's true because a lot of leadership studies take place. Um, if you look at the amount of programs and books and whatnot, I just put up a few here. The I mean, many of you all, for example, any of you all ever did the 7 habits? Anybody? I've done, in my lifetime, I've done 2 leadership programs already. I've done the 7 habits of highly effective people, and I have done something called leadership challenge. Um, now with a visiting lecturer from West Virginia of all places. Hi, Dale. Welcome. That was quite an interesting class, actually, that we looked at. So, picking back up from the current slide, one of the more famous ones that you might have been familiar with is Tony Robbins and the DAFT leadership model. We are actually going to be using this DAFT model as well, aspect of the DAFT model in this class as well. So, lots and lots of studies and approaches to trying to understand leadership, um, and in all fields, not only in business, though a lot of them are in business, but a lot of it is in professional studies and in education. So the problem is because of the amount of studies, you don't really have any single definition of leadership because as this individual indicates that leadership means different things to different people, and that's true. Looked at, and we have to understand why that's the case. Somebody's mic is on and causing a lot of noise. Well,
Sing. Meet your mic, sing.
All right, Bobby, we're in.
all right. So, in other words, what we're looking at here is we're trying to see, first off, what was done in the past and what then is the model that we're going to be looking at. Because chapter 3 then outlines the model that we're looking at. So, in essence, this chapter is looking at all of the different issues that have given rise to leadership potential and leadership opportunities. So, how many of you all are familiar with this young lady called Greta Thunberg?
As a young environmentalist,
Yes, and she has
yeah,
a
I see some of her deliveries already.
right, and she has a particular condition um, that prevents her from doing certain things. You're familiar with it? It's very unlikely that she can or would end up in a leadership position because she's on the spectrum of having what they call it again, Roy?
Down syndrome.
No, not Down syndrome.
Autism.
She's autistic, yes. So what happens with autistic people? They don't have some of the social filters that we normally put up. We don't allow for our society's norms to shape some of the ways we treat people. So we don't outright say, hey, you ugly kind of thing. We don't just say what's on our mind. But that's part of the problem with her. She just says what's on her mind, and that has made her a very powerful individual when it comes to um, a leader in climate change. And um, she's kind of gotten a lot of coverage prior to the prior to the pandemic coming up. She was being touted around as one of the leading individuals for it. But you realize that opportunities and issues give rise to leaders, and different leaders arise in different circumstances. What about that young girl in Pakistan, the one who survived the rape and disfigurement, Malika? You all remember her and how she came up
Yes.
as a leader in terms of women and women's issues, especially with violence. Um, um, Somebody else coming in. Hold on. Hi, Nigel. So, in essence, what you find happening here is that different opportunities allow for different leaders to come up. So, for example, Terence Dialsing and the CMO, Dr. Parasram, have arisen in our country out coming out of the pandemic situation as leaders in public health. And you have this other guy, Dr. Avi Brown, who's also come up to the public eye as leaders or leadership in the area of the pandemic situation. And that's because in a situation of crisis, it gives rise to people becoming focused on, and we look to them for guidance and for leadership, and that's something that you'd see a lot of. All right, so those are some of the things that allow us to have or see leaders coming to the fore. Even the Black Lives Matter movement, you see a lot of young individuals rising to that because of the nature of how it has impacted upon people. So, and sometimes just based on what people have said, that kind of stuff, in the midst of some sort of phenomenon or some sort of breakdown, they've come across in leadership positions or garnered 15 minutes of fame, kind of thing like that. What they do with it is the bigger issue that we're looking at. All right, so one of this here was really something that I found was very true. Far too often our leaders disappoint us, and it leads us to despair and distrust of leadership, which creates the anti-leadership vaccine. Interesting that we should be talking about vaccines, and this is true because when people rise to positions of leadership in society, sometimes what ends up happening is that they don't follow through. And when they don't follow through, we tend to develop a very anti-leadership type of stance. We as followers can be very distrusting of the people in leadership, and we see that happening all the time. I don't know if any of you all have evidence of it. Just this morning, I was looking at a post that somebody put up on Facebook about a letter that she had written about something to do with the vaccines here in Trinidad, and the minister is talking about seeking legal action against the person for writing that letter to ask questions. Anybody familiar with what I'm talking about?
As
Yes,
the
sir.
minister held,
Yes.
There's Suzette
Suzette
Louis.
Louis.
Yeah, she asked some questions about the. Now listen to her response to it, and if what she's seeing is accurate in terms of what the letter was about, I really don't understand why the minister would have. Um, but is that woman politically connected or motivated? Any of you?
She seems to be
Most
she's a
she
likely.
lives.
political
I know she
she's a
lives out of
political
the country.
activist. She's an activist, but sometimes some of her comments and statements seem kind of skewed towards the opposition.
She does
Sometimes.
not. She does not reside in Trinidad. She left the country for some reason.
Also, she resides outside of the country.
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that element. So she's commenting on things inside Trinidad and Tobago and asking questions that people don't want to answer. And that's a interesting thing about leadership. Sometimes we are asked in positions of leadership, you're asked to defend your situation or your position on certain things. And it can make life pretty difficult, I think. Guys, I want to do something here. Hold on. I just want to turn off my camera because the light is bothering me a bit. All right. Whoa, nothing. Somebody's having problems. Who's freeze?
Jeffrey's saying, yeah, we're not some seals.
Okay. All right. Cool. No worries. Tell him when he gets through. You can just join the class. All right. So now I know you guys have had opportunities to be in leadership positions already, correct? As seniors in the organization, you have led probably small teams of individuals under your command. In your organization, the fact that you have been in your organization for such a length of time, you've also risen to positions of leadership based upon the length of service that you've had. And how do you find? What's your take on this anti-leadership vaccine and this feeling of distrust that society has towards leadership, especially in today's modern environment?
That will never stop.
But do you agree with the position of the text here that because in the past, it may not necessarily be you, other leaders have disappointed people, that it has created a situation where there's a great amount of distrust about leadership and people in leadership? In fact,
I agree.
While that may be
Yes.
true, there are some people who are naturally anti-leader.
no, but it didn't naturally end up there. That's the point the text is making. And it's the point I believe that we are at. It didn't end up there. It started with people initially trusting people to do the right thing.
Bad experiences.
And experiences have taught them that people are not going to be honest about where they are. And they take advantage of their leadership positions for their own self-interest. And that's the
But I
part.
don't think it's always I don't think it is always anti-leader. Sometimes it's just anti-authority.
Well,
And I think that some people they kind of predisposed to that way of thinking, that way of behaving.
true. There may be some element of that, but why?
There
Right. So
is the issue of being anti-authority, but the anti-authority stance has grown because there's always some issue with those in authority who have been found to be looking to line their pockets or improve their family and their standing in society at the expense of those who have put them in authority. And if they always have those issues coming up, there will always be an anti-authority pocket, and those will grow because of these individuals who always come up showing lack of moral character in authority.
But I'm not even talking about leadership at that level, anti-leadership
Well
at that
said,
level.
politician.
I'm talking about simple employer-employee relationships where people they just have that kind of adversarial attitude and approach towards the employer or the supervisor for that matter. They don't like anybody tell them anything. And that's just it. So it might seem anti-leader, but really is anti-authority.
yeah, I think you're on a point there. Hold, guys. Let me just shut this door up.
Top tip.
Mark, you tell it shut up, yes?
I see dog go back in it.
Go shoot the dog, eh?
I hit him a little tranquilizer. He must shut up, Brandy.
Yeah, that has worked. That has worked.
That's too expensive. One big thing.
We know you experienced that, children. But the minister fast and out of place really to begin so defensive if somebody just asks him a question about something.
But
he has something to hide.
he get on like that because he has something to hide.
Well, that
You always have something to hide.
always point to that. From
No,
the time you start to look forward,
No,
every time somebody
that's why. Now we studying. That's why Rowley and them not looking to anybody for bringing anything because they have the Alsing bringing in on the own side. And some Makal want to
She's a
bring in
lawyer.
there, them bring in all kind of things.
I was thinking the same thing.
From what this woman saying. From what this woman saying, the Alsing have friend and family bringing in Paris.
Well, she didn't say he has.
That's a Michigan Saman saying code though.
She asked him if he has
She's a lawyer. She's a lawyer. She brave.
Well, the way he get, all he had to do is answer one and say that is not true. But the man say, I'm going to take it apart. He say that is not true. You gonna say, hey, I'm going to take it apart. What kind of thing is that?
He can't say that is not true because he knows what you're talking about.
And remember, he's a pharmacist. Remember, he's a pharmacist by profession, so it's obvious he would have links through the years that might put him in a position to source things privately.
At the stage where he was at, he and Parasham, them have complete assurances by the public. Everybody go believe them. All you had to do is stand up and say, "Oh man, I know what you're talking about." Like all he had to do. Man jump up and call out, they're going and get a lawyer and this and that.
But if you could go in court and get some money when somebody says something, I happy for you to do that.
But as a public figure who really answerable to the public, that's not supposed to be your default position. Your position is supposed to be to report it.
And like the woman, she's part of the public.
Where you wanna bet he ain't going to no court, he ain't going to no lawyer, no nothing. I just set a big old talk to
Well,
once again the chat.
Like she said on
Well,
her
you're making
report,
yourself look bad now.
that is an attempt to intimidate. Is an attempt because from the time the average person here, lawyer and court and thing, they thinking big heavy losses.
Let me ask you a question now. Why it is we just always equate leadership and ethics with politics?
Because it's one of the natural frames that we always look towards when it comes to leadership. Because remember, leadership
It's
is about,
something.
yeah, it's about an area that affects people the most. And in our country, the political leadership tends to have a lot of influence on what takes place around us because of the nature of our economy.
A lot of
And
times,
when you look at the end of the day, when you start off in a small leadership position, by the end of your life, and most times you end up in a political arena.
Correct.
a lot of times politicians, they present themselves as leaders. Okay, they were not chosen or elected per se before they enter into office. And when they do go into office, and people realize that they're not really showing true leadership traits and qualities, that's why the anti-leadership vaccine come about, because they're showing themselves for who they really are. People know they are not. So we have to get a vaccine now against them. That is the whole thing.
And you realize
They present themselves as leaders and they are not. It's simple. What about leaders who people embrace because they show true leadership quality?
that's true, but remember, every leader is going to have to struggle through that particular issue that is faced by the leadership, because we are affected by what took place in the past. And if in the past we didn't trust these individuals, or we didn't trust people who rose to power of leadership because they did things that we look at as being less than trustworthy, then that's one of the reasons why we're going to find ourselves in situations where when people rise to leadership positions, people are going to be very distrusting of them initially. And it's sort of, to me, it kind of makes sense. And you kind of have to prove yourself in terms of being a leader. I don't know if you look at leadership from that potential. I certainly have had instances where I put my trust in people in the past when I was younger. And of course, as we get older, we become more, what's the term they use, more jaded in our vision of how things are. If you're ready to look at it. And so I think it was Wycliffe or Cemento was talking about the fact that a lot of people are anti-authority. And that happens because when growing up, one of the things that happens in youth is that we want, as we grow up, we want our authority to be, we want to exert our own authority on things, which is why you have that anti-establishment type of movement, because you don't agree with it. And they naturally come to a point where they want to be anything anti-establishment. And to a great extent, if you follow leadership issues and problems, you realize that a lot of it has to do with leaders who embrace the status quo and try and make sure that that status quo stays in existence. And a lot of people don't want the status quo because the status quo doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for the vast majority of younger, poorer people in society, those who are marginalized, if you think about it from that perspective. I like the discussion I came in on that was going on. I really was listening in for a bit before I turned back on my microphone. You guys
and then it have the saying that, well, in any position there is some element of power, and they always say that the more power you collect, the more corrupt you become.
Yeah, the phrase is absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And
so that if goes in with good intentions, by the end of the day, he has to conform to try to, well, not conform, but he has it had to give and take in politics to achieve goals. And at the end of the day, the give and take end up corrupting him to the point that he becomes just like the persons he was fighting against.
That's actually quite true, in the sense that the a lot of people, for example, when Obama came to power, believed that he would turn things over in when he got into his leadership position. And I remember talking to an older person, because when he came into power, I mean, I was like really, open. I'd see things change a lot and whatnot, and he'd buck against the status quo and stuff like that. He said, and one of the older gentlemen, was talking to me in school at the time. He said to me, one individual can't make those kind of long-term changes that we think we are looking for, because he's fighting against an indoctrinated system of leadership that has been sitting in power for the longest while. So they will either marginalize him, which is what the politicians did. Because if you ever look at how Obama's time went, he was barely able to do anything because he didn't have the support of the Republicans in office, and that is one of the things that you find happening. We ascribe to these individuals the hope of change, and then when they are unable to make the change because they're facing a system that locks them into certain sets of behaviors and value systems, and those systems can't change or are unwilling to change to allow for those things, then it makes that individual look ineffective as a leader, which is one of the ways in which it was done. That is
the very thing, Mr. Bisu, that we ask for and we fight for is the thing that works against us sometimes, and that is democracy.
Yes.
Because you could have a leader who has the best of intentions, as you rightly saying there in Mr. Obama's case, and because everything has to go to a vote, his will, what he wants to do, it is stymied.
Yes, and that is one of the other aspects of leadership that we have to look at. Yeah. All right.
We have to realize that democracy came about because people wanted to get away from one man having absolute authority, and they wanted to spread authority around. So this just is a result of something like that.
Right, but at the end of the day, he didn't have much impact.
Well, they say democracy is a bad form of government. The only thing is that every other form of government worse than democracy. So we stick with democracy.
That's true. I would have to say that because
the best bad way of governance.
Yeah, is the lesser of all evils.
Yeah.
Is the lesser of all evils. All right. All right, so let's look at these. The research provides insight into leadership today. Many myths can be dispelled. Let's look at this then. An important consideration in the understanding of leadership is the context in which it's practiced. And this is what we're talking about here. Context is really important when we come to looking at leadership, because leadership in a social movement is different to leadership practice in your office or what is practiced in government. And it means that no one model can fully explain what takes place in each of those issues. So, for example, in the classrooms that you guys have been in, you might have seen leadership being practiced there in a more democratic method. Smaller groups allow for faster decision making, correct? And some people, hold on, somebody's, hi, Sudin. By chance, did Did anybody hear from Miss McIntyre?
I did not.
Whose group is she in now?
That's a Forest from. No word from her.
No word from her. Send her a message and see if she's because I know yesterday she would have been badly affected by what took place online. If at all.
No problem, sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. So, so we were looking at the context of leadership and how you all found the leadership in your class, your classroom situations, as opposed to where you work. Is the leadership in your classroom situation much easier to manage, more open and trusting than maybe the leadership that you've experienced in your job site, or in like what we're talking about here now in terms of our political environment?
Yeah, in the classroom setting, because as you rightly said, in the smaller groups, you are more effective and more is done. Unlike when you're in a larger group, more people to manage, and it comes back to the groups with norming, storming, and so on. That takes longer, and so there's a lot of dynamics that are involved in effective leadership. But smaller groups are better and easier to manage, and you get more done.
Yep, because of the concise nature of how groups can arrive at consensus very quickly. All right. Other myths that the study is going to dispel would be leaders are born, not made. We're going to dispel that. Leadership is hierarchical and you need to hold a formal position. That is also a lie. Some people are leaders without status, without formal positions. And they arrive at that primarily because of other things that you have to have charisma to be an effective leader. That's also going to be a myth that is going to be dispelled. There is one standard way of leading. And this is going to be dispelled as well. Is it possible to be a manager and a leader at the same time? That's actually not true. You only need to have common sense to be an effective leader. No, you don't. You don't only need common sense. You need a lot of other skills to be effective as a leader. A lot of people have looked at leadership as being, in fact, I know Professor Ken Julian talked about it the most. You all are familiar with who Professor Ken Julian is, right?
Yep.
Very.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Trinidad not familiar with his early work and his whole body of work, we just.
Well, you might be familiar with his.
We're familiar with the latter part.
The latter part of his work, right? And if we focus on that, in the latter part of his work, what he kept on saying was that the hard part of managing a country is not the technical skills, but the soft skills. And what he was talking about was those soft managerial skills of dealing with people to people. Because it's not something that as engineers and technicians you're being taught effectively to do. You find that management, if for those of you who've been studying management, you'd realize that management is a soft skill. It's because it is dealing with motivating people to do things they don't necessarily want to do, to be able to achieve some goal or objective for the organization or for the country as a whole. And those skills are the things that Professor Ken Julian was indicating. Those are the harder ones to learn because we tend to lead the way we've been led. I don't know if you would agree with that statement. We tend to lead the way we've been led, and that starts from home. So if your father or your mother were very disciplinarian in nature, you would find that your leadership models will tend to be the same way as well. Do you find that happening?
As a form of conditioning.
Correct. So in essence, what he's saying is that leadership has a tendency, because it's a taught skill, it tends to be conditioned from birth. As you experience leadership you begin to develop those particular qualities moving along the way. So that was, I found, that was an interesting element, because he was of course probably talking about or referring to his own background, where I think he had a very forceful parent who would be highly disciplinarian, and you did what he said when he said. So therefore, when he was in situations where he was exerting leadership, you better do what he said, or else he would get angry. I don't know how many of you all lived a life like that, where whatever your dad said or your mom said, you did, and if you didn't do it, then um, you know, God help you, kind of thing like that. Any of you all lived in situations like that?
But I don't think that's
Normal Caribbean life.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. Somebody was saying something.
Yeah, I don't think that that principle would apply to everyone, because
It's correct.
remember, depending on your circumstances, the nature part of you might overcome the nurture part.
Right.
I do think that people are predisposed to certain behaviors, and no matter what your environment might subject you to, you would have the ability to go beyond that.
Right. So you are rooted in the argument of nature versus nurture, and you realize that that argument has never really been fully answered, right?
Yes, yes.
So it's
I look at it as a spectrum, Mr. Bisu. And some people are more that way than others.
correct. I would say so, and it has to do, I think, from my observation, really, has to do with a level of education, because without being aware that there are alternatives that are available to you, you'd only learn the alternatives if somebody practices those alternatives around you. That makes sense to you? Unless you are otherwise educated
to some extent,
alternative methodologies. So therefore, without the benefit of education, you're going to find that the you're going to find that the environment may govern more about how you behave than nature, that type of stuff. Nature and nature will come up with
but
that.
sometimes I believe being enlightened is more important than being educated at certain times.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because enlightenment and education supposedly have links with each other. And enlightenment is supposed to really come from or through education. But I've seen the reverse as well as that. So,
but you do have those people who in common terms we refer to as educated asses. They have the world of book sense, all the degrees and whatnot.
Yes.
Right outside of that, they are idiots.
Right.
That goes to show that education is not a classroom thing.
Right. That's
exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
Right. Education simply means, and I remember my father telling me this when I graduated from university, and he said to me, all my degree tells me is that you have the capacity to teach yourself. It doesn't mean anything yet. When you begin to put those things into practice, that's when you're going to reveal whether or not you've been educated or not. And I found that at that point in time, I was quite aghast that the degree that I had counted for nothing really. So why bother to do that?
I think it's unfair to expect every form of education to teach things like social skills when the education clearly have a certain purpose.
Yes.
Has a certain syllabus designed for certification in some area, but
yeah, and that was why Ken Julian had talked about the part that getting the technical information was one part, but then getting the soft skills required a different element, which is one of the reasons why you see leadership programs arising in in specific disciplines. So you'd see leadership in engineering and that kind of stuff coming up. You go into any new degree program, you're going to see some kind of supervisory management studies coming up in part of it. I know in John Donaldson Technical, we used to teach supervisory management in the technician programs, and we embedded it in the communication program as well, because the important element of understanding how to manage people was going to be critical for technicians and engineers, especially if they wanted to get the job done, because that was where the effectiveness element would come up from. So that was thing. All right, so some truths about leadership. Many people have the capacity to lead, but not all see themselves as leaders in the traditional manner. That's true. Do you agree with that? Leaders are not born with innate characteristics or skills predispositioning them to be leaders. And a person's environment can influence the development of leadership skills and interests. Do you agree with these as truths?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Leadership occurs at all levels of an organization, and progressive organizations strive to flatten their hierarchy to empower people throughout the organization to participate in the leadership process. Now, this is something that may not be very popular in traditional organizations, especially those with people who have, or organizations who have traditional views as to what leadership is about. So you'd find that sometimes this element here, the progressive organization, is a myth of type. So you can ask yourself, do you know any progressive organizations outside there? I can't say it's the police service, right? Or the prison services.
You're talking about Trinidad or
I'm talking about Trinidad. I
don't think organization in Trinidad see the need for that.
Progressive organization. Or flattening hierarchy.
Yeah, we do
Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Them not really from Trinidad.
Well, they're
here.
And they're going to have to follow the guidelines.
Feedback.
Yeah, somebody's mic is open. All right, so the idea really is organizations that may have inherited flattening of leadership and or progressive organizations, we just use that, might be something inherited from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. But you have to remember too that we inherited all of our organizational structures from somewhere else. The police service, for example, comes from the history of the the British service that we inherited. Constabulary, that's it. I can never pronounce that word right. Even the prison service is the same, not so. I think the fire services also inherited from what existed outside. So because we're not working in a vacuum, the leadership that we would have encountered or developed in Trinidad and Tobago didn't come from a vacuum, it came from somewhere else. So an organization coming here and inheriting their particular leadership model is not unheard of. So the Habitat for, who said the Habitat for Humanity has a flattened organization? Who was that individual?
That was me.
Are you a member?
No, sir.
So how are you aware that it's a flattened organization?
The concept of the Habitat for Humanity is nobody leads. Everybody has their part to play. You contribute how you can, and no one is more important than the other.
Right. Okay. So it's one of cooperation all the way through the process.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, but that's a model that they developed to be able to get their work done, right? But in the practice of what they some people rise into more leadership type positions, activities, organizational, that kind of stuff?
I would imagine that happens because they don't have a let me say, a dedicated staff to say, well, I in charge of plumbing and this one in charge of that, and
right. I was thinking about
wherever they get the resources from, they use it in
because it could become confusing if you don't have a project manager and you're working on homes and you're unable to coordinate things. Huh?
there would be somebody who would coordinate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is the ultimate leader.
Right, but it does give a what's the word I want to use? It may in fact give that situation type of leadership potential. Huh? You realize that, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, all right, let's look at that. Charisma is not a prerequisite for leadership. Charismatic leaders have a profound and unusual effect on followers. They are seen as visionaries who have strong desires for power and they can easily motivate others. However, many accomplished leaders are not described as charismatic, and for every positive charismatic example, seen negative ones exist. And this is the reason why charisma is not necessary for leadership, for being a good leader. That danger of charismatic leaders being negative is a real one that we have to pay attention to, because charismatic people have in the past and can have the potential to lead people down negative paths along the way. So, can you think of any?
Jim Jones.
Yeah, yeah.
Yazin Abubakar, a charismatic leader.
Correct, yeah.
The guy in charge of DS.
The guy in charge of?
Drug Susu.
DSS.
DSS. All right.
He don't qualify.
Well, he may be charismatic among the people that he interacted with. Whether he gets a wider platform is a different issue. Why do you say he doesn't qualify?
Because of the same platform that he has. All the others had a larger forum, a larger membership, if you want to say that, and that's just my personal view.
Okay. Anybody disagree with that?
Well, I believe the man had more people than Baka among the money and put.
Yeah,
if the state did
but
this,
was it charisma or the opportunity to get rich opportunity? That is not charisma. That wasn't charisma. In terms of him selling the idea, it wasn't charisma that did it for the people. The opportunity
But that is one of the elements that is give rise to followership. When people see something that they can benefit from.
The man is a businessman. He ain't no charismatic leader.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. So we're still arguing about whether the first man charismatic or not.
He's a businessman.
All right.
we accept all the argument, but 75%.
What was his argument? I missed it.
That the man use more people greed than charisma.
All right. You know why you're getting an echo from my microphone? Your speaker is either too close to your microphone or your speaker is too loud. All right, so okay, so we have that situation, charismatic. Charismatic leadership is a dangerous thing, and just remember that. And the reason why it's dangerous is because the reaction to people who are charismatic is not necessarily going to be based upon logic. It's going to be based on how people feel, and that is potentially where the trouble with charismatic leadership comes up, because charismatic leaders make you feel a certain way. In fact, a lot of people who if you've been with somebody who's charismatic, when they come out of a meeting with a charismatic leader, they're sometimes almost in tears and crying and that kind of stuff, because they feel so moved by the individual.
But I would think it really becomes dangerous if the charismatic leader is dangerous.
Correct, but you have to remember, charismatic leaders have in the past been utilized by individuals. All right, so how many of you all belong to the small church environment where there's a pastor on Sunday where they meet with the pastor and stuff like that?
I do.
Right. The popularity of the church is highly dependent upon how people respond and react to the charisma of the pastor and the leader in the church, the leaders in the church, not so?
Yep.
Yes.
And that is where, because what you're doing there is you're marrying two very dangerous things together: emotional responses to something that to religion, which really speak to how people position themselves in life around them. Now, I'm not looking at this from the position of somebody who's anti-religious or anything like that. But you have to remember that when we start to talk about religion, people begin to get very personal about it and very emotive about it. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. Together with politics.
Yes, sir.
Right, and politics is another one and that's why politicians and the church and politics is supposed to be separated from each other for that very same reason. Because there's a tendency for us to stop thinking in a logical manner when we're dealing with these topics. Therefore, there's a problem sometimes when you have a charismatic person who's going to use your emotional responses to things to push for certain types of changes. Because is it possible that the person will always remain the same benevolent? But no, the word is benevolent. Sorry, is the person going to stay good, or are they going to over time change? Because some people have started off being good leaders with noble causes, and then ended up going in a totally different direction.
There's a saying that today's freedom fighter is tomorrow's tyrant.
And today's tyrant can become tomorrow's freedom fighter too. It goes in both directions.
Yeah.
All right. From all reports, Bin Laden, for example, was a very charismatic leader in his field, his area, and he was able to get a lot of support for the position that he was going to be pushing on. All right.
Would you describe Donald Trump as a charismatic leader?
He was charismatic to the people that were appealed to him, and that's the other thing. Charismatic. I wouldn't say he was charismatic, but he was able to manipulate people's feelings by knowing what they wanted. He was more what I would say a pragmatic madman.
He was a catalyst for.
Yeah, he represented something in their society that people were probably not inclined to put into words, but he was willing to put it into words and embody it. and that's something that that I think, because I never saw him as charismatic. To me, for me, my reaction to him was always, this guy's an idiot, even before he was in politics. From even when he was just on television and stuff. See this quote from Drucker here: three most charismatic leaders in the century inflicted more suffering on the human race than almost any trio in history: Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. All right, we all know, well, we know Hitler, Stalin was Russia, and Mao was from China. All right, what matters is not the leader's charisma. What matters is the leader's mission. And this is the point that Drucker is trying to make in this quote. The charismatic nature of leadership is potentially dangerous because of the fact that when people are dealing with charisma, they're not dealing with logic and reason, they're dealing with emotion and feelings. And that makes it, when you make decisions based upon your emotions alone, you're probably going to make very dangerous and poor decisions. That makes sense?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so and these are charismatic leaders. You all recognize a few of them, right?
All of them.
All of them, all right? So we know Hitler over here, Mahatma Gandhi, Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King. And everybody recognize this guy?
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones.
Yep. Interestingly, a lot of my younger students don't recognize him at all. Jim Jones, what's he famous for, guys? Or infamous?
The Guyana tragedy.
I would call it tragedy, the massacre.
Yeah.
Mass suicide.
The Jonestown massacre.
Jonestown massacre, yes. Interesting. There are a lot of movies that go through that whole history. You should, if you ever want to, you can have a look at them. In fact, all of them have movies based on their lives. All right. So another truth: there is not one right way to lead. A person's leadership approach or style might be influenced by his or her sex, cultural identity, or personal value system. The context of the setting determines the type of leadership required to be effective. And we talked about this before. Leadership has to be malleable. It has to adapt to the situations that it finds itself in and the people who are exercising it. And the styles, therefore, not going to be, it's going to be their style. It's not going to be any fixed style that comes out of a guideline or checklist, do A followed by B followed by C. It doesn't work that way. That's why it's one of the reasons why leadership is such a difficult area to study and to write about. The importance of distinguishing between management and leadership. A manager is an individual who holds a directive post in an organization, presiding over processes by which the organization functions, allocating resources and making the best use of people. So what they're trying to say here, management is different to leadership. That's what they're trying to get to. So that management is a different set of skills, more analytical in nature, where it's easily measured, whereas leadership is about the relationships that the managers have with the individuals that they're trying to manage. You understand that? I know you all get this. It's easy to see this. The manager trying to get things done, that's the management function. The leadership function ought to really speak to the relationship of how they work with individuals to get this done. A lot of managers don't see that distinction. They behave in a manner where I tell you to do something, you do it. That's management. That is leadership. That's not leadership. Leadership is about the motivating factors that come, the unspoken or unseen things in terms of body language and gesturing and how you work with individuals to get them to be able to work with each other and how you get the best out of them. And that's one of the elements about leadership that we're going to have to focus here a little bit about. All right. So this is why they keep on, the manager is bound to the organization, yes, because the organization is who's paying you, and therefore you have to pay attention to that, and they must be preoccupied with doing things the way that the organization wants them done, whereas the leaders are focused on doing the right thing. So you see a difference here. Managers are preoccupied with doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing the right thing. What's the difference there? Anybody could see that?
One boundary, one bordering on morals and ethics and so on.
Right.
The
The other one
other
not necessarily that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if we think about some of these more successful companies outside there, you realize that they're not necessarily going to be looking at doing the right things. They just want it done in a manner that's going to get them the greatest returns, whether or not it's the right thing to do or not. And that is one of the things that makes for the dichotomy that we face in terms of leadership. All right. Okay, so there are distinctions between management and leadership that is also overlaps and function associated with both processes. So this just keeps on going about the whole distinction between management and the leadership potential or the leadership functions. So that what they're trying to indicate here is that there's a difference between the two, and that you have to understand that there is a difference, and it's important that somebody can be effective as a manager, but they can be a poor leader. Similarly, they can be a poor leader, but an effective manager. And they actually conducted a lot of research in this area to be able to tell if that's the case. The other truth that this text is going to also look is going to go through the fact that leadership is teachable, and the fact that we're doing this course just simply says that that's the case. But we are going to come across mindsets outside there about leadership not being a teachable thing. It's something that's supposed to come from within, and there's no preparation that will make you a good leader. You're either going to be a good leader or not, and that's the point that we talked about here before. That leadership is it's not just about common sense. It's about developing certain sets of skills that make you better at leadership than somebody who lacks some of the training. So that's another truth about leadership. All right, so here they started looking at definitions of leadership. You see, they went all the way back to the 1300s. And of course, you notice that the first place that it was traced to has to do with political leadership. Formal definitions started to arrive from 1900s to the 1929, and in the 1980s there was 110 definitions created by scholars from a wide range of academic fields, and at least 221 definitions can be found in books and other scholarly publications. At least three. So here what they're talking about is that leadership started from very humble beginnings from the 1300s, moving now where there is so much emphasis placed upon the nature of leadership that it's kind of gotten into a small business, all right, kind of thing. So this is one of the early definitions. The preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control of societal phenomena. That's pretty grim there. The preeminence of one or a few individuals. Control of events, sort of like a master of puppets kind of thing. Early definitions describe leadership as one person controlling others. That's that kind of scary, kind of Machiavellian kind of thing that you look at. Contemporary definitions describe leadership as a relational process based on mutual goals towards some action. So you're seeing a morphing from that control to the relational. So hopefully we'll come to agree that Leadership is more about the relationship than it is about control. All right. And the fact is that it's a level of interaction between leaders and followers who work together to accomplish a goal or some type of action. So this is the relational aspect that we're looking at. And the interaction is an important element. So other definitions continue in different fields. They look at defining leadership in one way or the other. So this chapter goes on to try and look at the various frameworks that have tried to define what is leadership, and each one, as we said, comes up with its own view of what leadership is, which is one of the reasons why it becomes so tricky to deal with. Miss McIntyre. Hello, Miss McIntyre. Hello. Hi, Naisha. Can you hear us? Hello? All right. Hopefully she'll be able to get.
She would have sent a text to you. She probably is hearing you. I don't know if the mic is not on, but she sent a text saying hello.
Okay, all right. Okay. So as we said before, the definitions that we're looking at here vary from field to field. So the idea that we need to understand from here is really that because leadership is so purpose driven, and you study leadership in different contexts, you're going to end up with different definitions based upon the context that that we look at it. Then we want to look at it as an interdisciplinary subject, because it's a kind of elusive thing that we sometimes see in different fields. So definitions today, as I said, there's no one correct definition, and therefore we have to ask this important: what is the purpose of leadership? Once we decide on what the function of leadership is, then that is going to probably be the best way in which is going to give us a definition that we can work with. All right. Different contexts, different situations. All right. 8 metaphors used to describe leadership: the competitive market, or metaphor. Anybody familiar with that? Competitive market, the leader in the market kind of thing. The administrative metaphor, collective bargaining metaphor, the democratic metaphor, the consensus, anarchy, independent judiciary metaphor, and the okay.
Plebiscitary autocracy.
Say that again.
Plebiscitary autocracy. Autocracy.
As autocratic, right? So
yeah,
that probably sounds right. I actually have a form of dyslexia when it comes to some of these things, so we'll see how that works out.
But what does that mean, though?
Right. So that's what we're gonna get to.
I have a clue.
So here we have. This is the metaphoric examples provide us with a clearer or more visual understanding of concepts or processes. Common contemporary metaphor likens leadership to an orchestra. So when you talk about autocratic, what is the word? If you focus on the word autocratic, what do you think it means?
One man, strong man.
Autocratic means you must follow the rule of the person in charge, and the way in which it's done is probably going to
Russia is done.
Correct, like the czars and stuff. It's going to be a harsh situation. So that's why they refer to it as one of the metaphoric definitions. Metaphoric meaning that they're making a comparison. A metaphor is a comparison that's not fully stated. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why they oftentimes compare leadership to leadership in an orchestra or symphony. Now, there's a musician among us, not so?
Yeah.
Priest, musician, or prisoners, or one of them. All right, so you might be able to see this there. You might see this individual here, the conductor. He is the leader in the orchestra. But what limits him?
The cooperation of others.
Right. And not only the cooperation, but the capacity of the others, not so?
Yeah.
Capacity and dedication.
Correct. So we understand, therefore, that he's going to need a lot of cooperation. So his job is to try and do what?
Motivate, encourage, get them to work together.
Coordinate.
Coordinate.
Set an objective, set a goal.
Keep them focused.
Correct. Help to maintain their concentration, because especially in orchestras, when you're performing, especially a long piece, it requires a great deal of concentration over a long period, fairly long period, an intense period of time. So think about it like you're in a performance for 3 hours. It's like being in an exam. You have to focus your attention on what you need to do to execute. And his job is to facilitate people's ability to bring out the best. Now, another comparative that was used by Dupree here has to do with the jazz band. Jazz band leaders must choose the music, find the right musicians, and perform in public. But the effect of the performance depends on so many things: the environment, like the sound system, the volunteers playing in the band, the need for everyone to perform as individuals and as a group, the absolute dependence of the leader on the members of the band, and the need for the leader to follow, for the followers to play well. The need of the leader for the followers to play well. This metaphoric definition of leadership is actually one of the more, I should say, apt definitions of what the leadership is about. True leadership, I should say. Because if you liken the type of leadership that takes place in organizations and in society, what you're trying to do is to bring all the best elements together to be able to function together. The problem, or the good thing with this, is that at some point in time, the performance ends. But in other issues, you're going to see that does leadership stop or end? Are you always practicing leadership? If you read the text, you know the answer to this.
No, it's momentary.
Right. So that brings us to something that they talked about later on. Do you read? All right. So we understand this whole jazz metaphor, right? Public good and so on. So this metaphor is really trying to show you how dynamic that whole situation is. So this, anytime people do leadership, they're involved in a process that is bounded by time, subject matter specific leaders collaboration. Leadership is time specific, place specific, and context specific. Now this makes sense. Time specific in that you're performing your leadership roles at specific times. This is the momentary issues that we talk about. It's place specific. You're not in a leadership position all the time, all over the place. When you're home with your family and stuff, you might be a leader all the time with them, or you're enjoying your time with them. When you're lying with your buddies, you're in a leadership position. No, you're in a pair position, so that it's place specific. So it might be related to work, or it might be related to the household. Context specific. Context meaning that in what circumstances are you going to be exercising leadership positions?
Come back to this, what you just said there. There's more Peter Drucker and Frederick going on there than a clock by a smart.
Say that again. I'm not hearing you clearly.
It's more up Fred Luton's by a Peter Drucker, a smart by a block, planning, leading, organizing.
Right. Yeah, we could use that model as well. All right. So that's why they refer to it as episodic movements. All right. That makes sense, guys. So we're not always practicing leadership all the time. Leadership is in spurts and bits and pieces where necessary, where required. Okay. All right. So that this continues to go on to refer to the whole leadership element, because we can't be in leadership mode all the time, every hour of the day. But we have to be aware that we may be in a leadership position, especially when we are in view of the world. We need to be paying attention to what we're doing. All right. So at the end of the day, we're dealing with leadership as a complex and, as they refer to it, an elusive phenomenon. The multidisciplinary nature of leadership adds to its context, contextual richness, and reinforces the metaphor of leadership as an art form. When leadership was examined by social and behavioral science, it was discovered that leadership has many properties and many forms. So leadership is not a straightforward exercise. It's one that's quite complex, and we'll see that in terms of the different theories that evolved over time, that the theories attempted to try and explain it from various angles. So we're just going to quickly look at the various theories here. Initially, the theories indicated that leadership was simple. You just do what I say and be good to go. That's kind of like the idea I got when I was doing this reading it. A simple construct. You listen to what I say and you do what I say, and everything will work. All right. The field of leadership studies has been characterized as having a robust and respectable intellectual history. So let's see. Leadership theory will be summarized using the following classification. So these are the different theories that came up. We have the great man approach, trait approach, behavioral approach, the influence theories, the reciprocal leadership approaches, the chaos theories, and the situational contingency approaches. So these are the different theories or groups of theories that evolved over time to try and explain and kind of quantify where they worked with. Some of these you all met already, not so? You all should have met behavioral and at least the situational and OB and that kind of stuff. Did you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the influence theory, you all remember. Let's see how much you all remember from that. So the great man theories actually was probably first it comes out from the Darwinist thinking. Anybody who knows who Darwin is?
Charles
The
Darwin.
evolutionists.
The evolutionists, right? So the big thing coming out of that was survival of the fittest, correct? The strongest will dominate and survive to carry on. So again, here the great man theory has to do with great men make leaders. All right, so it was based on hereditary properties. So only those people who inherited the great characteristics of their previous great people will continue leadership, which is where the whole concept of leadership being held within families.
You're born into leadership. The assumption there.
Yeah.
North Korea.
Dynasty relationship.
Correct.
Dynasty.
Yeah.
All right. So those are the kind. Yes, go ahead.
So not North Korea alone. We have it in England, the monarchy.
Yes, correct. The monarch is a throwback to this period of the great man approach, where your lineage was important, which is one of the reasons why I think people have so much problems now with when they're looking at the monarch now and the fact that the princes and are marrying outside of the what they consider royal lines, um, especially where the vision or the view of what is a princess or what makes up the royalty is different to what people have traditionally seen. And I'm talking about the current situation where, well, the ongoing situation with the British Crown and um,
Meghan Markle, Prince
right.
Andrew.
Yes, that situation there. It is challenging the status quo of where people's minds are when it comes to thinking about how somebody's supposed to be a king or a queen or a princess, regardless of the fact that they really don't have much of a function in our society today. People still have these traditional beliefs, and I know people who were kind of upset when he got married to her and that kind of stuff, and I was kind of like, oh, why? Because and it's because no, because she's not a princess, she's not a royal blood, and that whole set of emotion that was hearing was amazing to listen to.
She's not even English.
Sorry?
She's not even English.
Yeah, well, she wouldn't be the first American or American woman that was brought into the crown. You all remember what was his name? The one who gave up the crown just before World War II because he got married to a man. King George, huh? Was it one of the Georges?
One of them George, yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember, but that was a whole. I think the Sparrow or Kitchener wrote a song about it. One of Philip Seniors wrote a song.
Yeah, well, people have been breaking the molds for centuries now.
For centuries, yeah. But
with tradition. That's how they end up with that queen. That's how they end up with that queen as the monarchy in the first place. Moving away from the kitchen.
Yeah, because she didn't want to get married coming out of the situation or something. Something like that. I had to pay attention to that.
No, the king wanted to marry a divorcee. And he had to relinquish the kingship of the kingdom. And that is how this whole I think it's the Anglican Church got started. Because
King James.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. That's quite correct.
Guys, there's a movie called The Crown on Netflix. If you guys watch that, you'll get the whole history on there.
Well, you just have to be careful with that, because it might remember any movie or book you read is an individual or group of individuals.
Yeah, but you'll still get a 3/4 perspective on it.
Yeah, get some perspective. Yeah, but you're right. The Crown does try to explain some of the background to it.
Might take it good for both sides. They will press me too long, and she should know better than to go into a family like that. So let it take what they get.
Lord, look at you. No, what I was commenting on was the fact that people in society still look to this as being so important, when in truth and in fact, royals are of no importance in your day-to-day life, if you really think about it now. At one point in time,
she went in the family for money. She went in the family for money, and the queen showed how she had to work for that money, and she said she's not going and work for that money.
I wouldn't say so. She came from a wealthy family.
I'm not agreeing with you there. She has her
She
own
came from a
money.
wealthy family, so money, I don't think money is an issue.
Money is not a motivator for her.
She's just an actress. She's just an actress. She ain't have a cent. The queen is the wealthiest woman in the planet. Check your
The woman's family has money.
Good for both sides. Then we move on.
She ain't have a cent.
So let's leave. You see what I'm talking about? How emotional people are about royalty.
Politics.
I look at see where it comes from. The aristocrats and that kind of stuff. Of course, the theory ignores to a great extent great women. So that was one of the things. It really was very male oriented in its belief of the line only being able to continue through the man. You'd realize that women are given second class status when it comes to these kind of things. So that's the great man theory. So what about the traits approach? You all are familiar with this one? Traits that leadership is emerges as traits that people have. I know I was reading a book the other day.
That more like born leaders.
Yes, that you have to be born with these kind of traits to be a leader. And in fact, one of the things that I was reading the other day about was that if this was the case, then serial killers who are psychopathic um, should make good leaders. And I thought that was so funny.
Well, so
Uh-huh.
well, if like you were saying before, that certain instances in history or in time just bring about leadership leaders is up just come out of instances.
That's situation.
If you're born if you're born with certain traits at certain points in time, when those traits are necessary, then those born with those traits would emerge as leaders.
Right. So what which then brings us to the point that what you're saying is that leadership is a matter of happenstance. You have to be born at the right time. So you have the right place, right time, right conditions, and right traits that you have. And what that may be what this trait theory is talking about. The trait theory is focusing on that the leaders must have certain characteristics to make them leaders. That's the part.
And the next point it was raising there, yes, psychopaths and would make good leaders, because when you check through the back of history, Hitler, Genghis Khan, Tamerlane,
psychopathic behavior.
All of those was killers.
Correct. And if that were the case, then we should be looking for the next serial killer to really take us forward. If the trait approach is to be believed or to follow. All right. Interestingly enough, the research in this area failed to really highlight that list of traits that they were talking about.
But so we're not cutting across. Those two serial killers, they fell from the chair at the Rima police station already,
Sorry, what?
Those two newcomer serial killers, they fell from a chair in the Arima police station recently.
Did they now? You're an officer. I can't even see who's talking there. Sounds like Mr. Wycliffe. You're a police officer, Mr. Wycliffe?
Oh, yes, I am, sir. And even
okay.
I know Joanne Batman personally too.
All right. So you have court closing thing, right? All right, good. Yeah, good to know.
I have suits.
Are they actually serial killers? Just this is an aside.
Well, there are a lot of bodies that we couldn't more or less retrieve based on his untimely comment. But yes, I know his father personally, I know his mother personally, and he knows me personally too. But I didn't climb up the chair though.
Okay, but all right. From a research perspective, it would be good to do something, because I'm finding that behavior in Trinidad is starting to rise in, and that phenomenon of serial killers is something that we have to pay attention to, because it tends to come up in society.
Yes, the type of music, the type of language, the type of shows, you will see that culturally environmental problem, because there's even though Andrew Morris also from charging him for robbery in Tunapuna. So I know both parties, whilst he was a juvenile. So the music, language, and the culture, the people who you associate with it tells a lot, because every time I look for Andrew Morris, he up in his zone at Chongtre, Tunapuna, and all about the place down Mango Road. So it's a culture.
I'm wondering how much of coming back to the whole thing, because we could take the nature-nurture argument into the development of individuals like that, psychopaths and that kind of stuff, and sociopaths. That's something that again, behaviorists are studying, but it's emergence and the sudden. It appears as if we're suddenly creating these people in our societies, because we have to remember one thing. regardless of where these people come from and how what they do, they still come from our own society. So there's something we pay attention to if we're finding that too many of individuals like this are engaging in our society. We're doing something collectively to encourage it or to create those situations or something we need.
Also,
Yeah.
you know that the psychological explanation or distinction between psychopaths and sociopaths is, to me, is a kind of acknowledgement that you have people who are born a certain way and you have people who are made a certain way.
Correct.
Right? Where the psychopaths are born wired a certain way,
Right, but
the mental,
the problem
and the
problem
sociopaths learn.
right. The problem I am having is that our society doesn't pay a lot of heed to people who are coming out as being different. And as a result of that, we are allowing these individuals into our mainstream society without paying attention to the fact that something is wrong. Um, Now, some of these individuals, I think it's the psychopath, can fool other people into believing um, that they're normal, but they have to actually recognize from early on that they can't feel the way that normal human beings would react. But they have to create that feeling or fake the feeling. Um, I think that's the psychopath. But the whole issue there has to do with the fact that if we have this phenomenon beginning to rear its head in more frequency in Trinidad and Tobago, then we have to begin to look at what's going on in our society. Why aren't we observing these individuals? And secondly, what are we doing to encourage it? So it's about shining a light on ourselves.
In terms of our society, the next group of people after parents who would have that
Teachers.
amount of interaction with children is the teachers.
Teachers. And
All right.
I know
And
that
I think we have we shooting ourselves in the foot by treating teachers the same way that we would treat any other employee in terms of the age that you have to be to come in as a teacher and then the age that you have to retire. I believe teachers should be more mature people, and you shouldn't put an age limit on when a teacher should exit the education system, because I think experience is where should count more than just teaching academics. You realize the home is failing to really teach children the correct way of doing things. And the next best institution to pick up that slack would be the formal education system. So a simple thing like interacting boys and girls interaction, where boys are not being taught the correct way or the acceptable way to interact with girls from the home. The school system is the institution, and I probably, not probably, but should be charged with that responsibility now, because the parents are ill equipped themselves to teach the children.
true, and the
Mark,
problem
Mark, you're just describing the topic in hand, there, leadership development, and the fact that it's failing in all the institutions, including the family.
Yeah, but
Yes,
Mark,
and you have very young teachers coming into the system and all who themselves would have been shortchanged in terms of upbringing, leadership qualities, and so how can they impart the
yeah, but teachers' job has a job to teach the children in whatever academics. You need expertise like psychologists and these type of people that deal with issues that children face from primary school to up, so that they could pick up whatever problems or issues.
So this is what I'm
Teachers can only
saying.
do so much.
The whole curriculum has to change. The curriculum for training teachers and the curriculum for training students. Both those two things have to be modified to treat with what we're dealing with at present. We can't be following something that is 50 years old, a system that is 50 years old, to try to deal with problems that we have now. this whole crime thing that we're dealing with, we had to treat it from both ends, from how it starts to how it is we treat it at the back end that we're dealing with right now.
You
So,
feel the government them don't know that? You feel the ministry don't know that?
I wouldn't
So
say
what?
they don't, but they're not doing anything. At least we're not seeing anything being done about it.
So what you all saying, Mark, is that we should start in the primary school or the
Yes,
schools.
definitely from the
Yeah,
primary
but
school level.
all right, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I disagree to a point because I believe teachers should start young and get experience from the older ones. So by the time they reach at a certain level, they are well trained, and
But
we
you
are
see,
take
again,
and yeah, and also when on the point of, I heard you say the boys. I'm only hearing that in society now because
no,
of
but
certain
girls
things.
too. Girls have to be taught
Why
how
are
to
people not,
respond.
or parents not teaching girls how they should manage themselves in society, in schools? We are only looking at boys in this
We
situation,
have
and
to
right
look at
now
both. We have to look at both because
we have to look at both.
generally speaking, boys are the aggressors. Boys are the initiators in approaching a girl.
That
Girls
used to be
also
so.
have to
That
be.
used to be so. Low.
I disagree
That
with that, Mark.
was you
To a
who
larger
are wrong.
extent. To a larger extent.
Mark, that is not true. That statement you make there that boys are the aggressors and the initiators. That is not a true statement, huh?
Now,
The-
I preface my statement by saying general. Yeah, I did say generally.
It have a paradigm shift, Mark.
That is not so because one of the things that has happened over the years, I mean, we're drifting a bit, is that the boys, the males, usually when they react, it is after a series of events would have occurred in most instances. And the other point that we miss is that in most of the attacks against the males, they go unnoticed. And that is where the imbalance arises because everybody notices when the male reacts in a particular way. They don't take notice when the females particularly do it. Unfortunately.
Yeah, because you remember recently, maybe like about 2 years ago, they had a whole outburst. They had a whole slew of videos being aired on TV where girls were the ones fighting and that sort of thing, beating up boys and all. Right? So they were saying you have to look at it both. You have to address it's such a broad issue that sometimes what you choose to talk about first will sound as though you're focusing only on that. But it's just the beginning. We have to start somewhere. Right now, I don't want it to be said that what ought to be thought of that is an age we have to look at when it comes to teaching or teachers. It should be more of an aptitude kind of test that teachers have to go through, right, to determine if they are fit to be educators, given what is required of educators now. You follow? You have some very mature 20-year-olds.
Yeah, and what I think really it's Samantha who's talking there, right?
Yes,
Is
sir.
really going to do is the degree of preparation to teach. Right now, the degree of preparation to teach is very limited. There was and has been a lot of discussion about making teacher training one of the requirements. Now, in teacher training, you do a lot of behavioral theory and psychology and sociology and crisis counseling and recognition of a lot of training in terms of how to be a teacher. And you're right, and there is a mentoring system that's supposed to exist. So all the things that Samantha was talking about exist, but it's not practiced.
I get it. Yeah, remember people have to do these programs. They have to do it conscientiously. It's not just a matter of doing it for the sake of doing it, and you get everything correct in the exam or whatever, and you move on. But how much have you really internalized? How much you are going to practice when you get out there?
Correct, and you're supposed to actually do something called teacher practice. And I remember when I was doing my teacher practice, I had teachers in my classroom, and I'm teaching a class, and they would then talk to me afterwards about things I'm doing right or wrong and that kind of stuff. And that went on for months. And almost an entire year, I had people coming into my class at various times. Sometimes with my knowledge, and sometimes without my knowledge. You just step in class to just see how things are going, to make sure that you're prepared, and But in a lot of instances, what they were paying attention was the area of the content and technique. But the soft skills that we're talking about here, your leadership capacity, your classroom management, the ability to develop the psychoanalytical elements would only develop with time and practice. But the fact that you have to do some training in terms of recognizing that there's a student who's having a problem and getting the help necessary. But part of the problem that comes up with that is that the help necessary doesn't necessarily exist. Because I can tell you from my teaching experience, a lot of times the students who needed help required, human. There was no services outside there that you could say, listen, this person needs to be kept away from their parents because something's happening in the home, and you need to get involvement with social services, stuff like that. A lot of times you can't do that. You can't get into a family and start that kind of activity with them because legally you're not allowed to. And then the whole practical situation of getting into a household, removing a child, requires the weight of some organization and law. So you're kind of tied up there. Now we have these systems in place, but are they effective? That's a different issue altogether. That's another element of it.
But what makes a system effective? Remember, a system is something static. Is there? It's on paper. It's a plan. It's a process. Is
Well,
the people within the system that has to make it work and has to make it effective.
Yeah, but most of the times what happens is that the well, I know what happened in our case. There was nobody in the posts. So the government just did not hire anybody to act in those positions. Or they were, well, that generally came down to be the situation. Because at one point in time, there was one social worker operating in all of Port of Spain. So how many schools you have in Port of Spain alone? And you have one social worker who's supposed to be moving from school to school.
That's terrible. That's terrible. There should be some kind of ratio to maintain.
Correct. There are recommended ratios between students and teachers, and then what you call support counseling services in the organization. In fact, for instance, COSTAT has its own ratios that we have to put together, and as a result, I don't know if you are familiar, but COSTAT provides that type of student support systems. But it requires the lecturer to identify when a student needs it. And a lot of lecturers don't know the process of how to get students to access the counseling elements. That type of stuff. Yeah.
That's Udine. There was a change in the teaching system but several years ago. Because I remember when teachers came out for 2 years, young teachers, and had to do, I don't know if it was A2 or teacher 2 or something they used to call them. And they used to work for 2 years and then go to the training college and be trained. And then they would come back out and do teaching practice. And
the way it worked was that you had to be placed in a position before you could be approved to be sent to teacher training college.
Yeah, but since that change.
82 they consider you until you get your degree, they say T1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changed. Now you gotta go and get a degree, and they consider T1 when you had when 2 years passed, that is the date. It's just like probation, Ramesh.
Yeah, and I know the system. It's just I can't remember which one of the two.
Probation exam. Oh, we don't have exam again in college, so everything what I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think they did that with the teaching service also. Because when those teachers came out for 2 years and they worked and then they went to college with a bit of experience, what was taught in the college was it was soaking a little more. They came out as better teachers. And if you look at the last 10 years, the surge of crime, maybe our teacher, that system is not working. Maybe that we need to go back to that system when we had better teachers and teachers who were more committed.
Right. But you also have to understand too the social
Maybe,
circumstances changed as well, because
maybe, sorry. Maybe they should to restart capital punishment. That would play a part.
I don't see it playing a part because we
Corporal punishment.
corporal punishment or capital punishment you're talking about.
But so haven't reviewed the textbooks and them with my children because around them I time doing this online classes, and the textbook in the primary school winning because a lot of professors, publishers get into with a lot of misleading text. And I wrote far, and the whole thing was there is a unit that more or less reviews it. So my whole policy was, why not the teachers who actually doing it write a report? They said I will take time. So we know what's going on right now, corruption.
Yeah. And to not only time, you have to assign your name to that too. So some people don't want to take the responsibility of reporting things. The part of the issue that's going on is that society has changed a lot, and because in the past teachers would have a higher level of respect within the household, so that if a teacher said something and sent a message to your house, to say, listen, we need to talk to your mother, your father, something like that. It used to be a big thing, but now you have family members coming into the school and threatening teachers, and of course, teachers are not helping that by themselves being vindictive and that type of stuff. So again, society has moved into a position where it has departed from some of its older behavioral patterns out of necessity or maybe just out of the fact that things have changed over time. But has it been to our benefit or has it been to our detriment? Those are things that we want to look at. And yes, right now what's happening, the move now is for somebody to be able to teach, they need to have 2 degrees, the degree in their specialty and then a degree in behavioral and teaching sciences. And that's something that could help, but there's a big gap between the proposed procedure and the actual procedure taking place. And then all the social work stuff that's supposed to come up with it. All that stuff kind of backburnered when we go into a situation where we don't have money to spend. And that's part and parcel of the whole problem. That is, when things happen, we don't get to that level of activity because the funding simply doesn't allow for it. So that's something else that we have to look at too. All right, so let's get back onto these theories. So we'll be looking at the trait theory. So these traits that we were talking about before, prior to that, we talked about the great man theory. Then we have the behavioral approaches. This is the one that you all should have met a good few of these. Behavioral approaches analyzes what managers do on the job and relates it to the content of the management activities, role, function, and responsibility. That's what the behavioral, it looks at the behavior factors. So therefore, it's trying to look at what is effective and ineffective. So it's gathering data about how people behave and seeing which behaviors have had better impacts. So you'd see behavioral approaches really being garnering a lot of evidence from looking at society and looking at previous activity. So this is one here. The Ohio and Michigan studies produced 2 dimensions of managerial behavior, consideration and initiating. So this is some of the findings that the theories of the behavioral theories came: consideration and initiating. Consideration is described as the degree to which a leader acts in a friendly and supportive manner, showing concern and stuff like that. That was the person showing themselves to be considerate, and initiating the degree to which the leader defines and structures his own role in the and the rules of subordinates towards attainment of the goals of the organization. Now, the two dimensions are independent of each other, so scores can vary between either it being positive or negative. So basically, what they're trying to do is to score people. Are you a considerate leader, or is there a balance, or more of an initiating leader? And then where did you sit on the spectrum when it came to those things? Then you had Blake and Morton proposing two-factor approach: concern for people, concern for production, which is basically similar thing. Where are you going to be? Do you exhibit behaviors that show concern for people, or are you only concerned for the output or the end result of what the company is doing? So these were some of the models that they had developed by looking at behaviors, by trying to check and see what behaviors are leading to what. So these models, so the three types of behaviors that were identified, you all should remember this one. This one should come up of task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behaviors, and participative leadership. So these behaviors are what they were beginning to measure to be able to determine whether or not people were going to move in that direction, or they were going to be measuring to see how effective a leader you would be based upon how much time you spent on these things. So there's some interesting studies that were done in relation to this, where they would be doing like check marks and that kind of stuff in terms of they of course they talked about the criticisms. The behaviors were simplistic in nature, and a lot of times they were just not being able to capture the nuances of how leaders behave, and it ignored a lot of these situational problems that were happening, or variables that we were looking at. And then, of course, the behavioral theory was inconclusive and wasn't consistent. So in one place, you'd see somebody do something and it'll have a good impact. Another place, you'd see somebody do something, the same thing, but not have a consistent impact on the workforce. So the behavioral theories fail to really explain the circumstances clearly. So then we came to situational contingent. So now this is where you start to put the situation in the context, or context into the behaviors. So they vary their behaviors based upon the context or situation that they find themselves. The situation determines who will emerge as the leader, and the leader being the product of the situation. So this is an interesting dichotomy here, because it means that the situation creates the leader. That's what the situational contingency approach is really speaking to. So how do so it's kind of like a chicken and egg story. They incorporate situational moderators variables to explain leadership effectiveness. Situational theories emphasize that leadership behavior cannot be explained in a vacuum, but they have to be explained in the circumstances or contexts in which they found themselves to be. So again, here they're trying to bring more variables into the study. So what you do is dependent upon where and in what context you're operating in. So that's what the situational theories were trying to look at. So you have the contingency theory that was looked at to try and bring in the impact of the environment that you're operating in, or the context that you're operating in, into the effectiveness of the leader given the context. So obviously what you're seeing here is that the models are becoming more and more complicated. So you had the least preferred coworker model, and then you had, so that least preferred developed by Phil describes how the situation moderates the relationship between leaders' traits and effectiveness. So that was one model, least preferred coworker. And then the second was the path goal theory, in which you are going to look at developing paths as a leader, parts for the individuals to attain the personal goals that they have, as well as the organizational goals that exist. Hold a second, guys. Hello? Hi? Yes. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so where were we?
The path theory.
Right. So we're on the path theory.
Goal theory. But that path goal theory seems to liken itself to Maslow's theory.
Correct. And that's a behavioral issue as well. Huh? So, but it's behavior based on so Maslow's going to come up on some of this as well. Too. But what you're finding here is that each theory is sort of like broadening their view of what are the issues that's coming up with leadership. So then you have so as we said, this is the situational theories. So you have the path goals. So again, problems with the theories that was identified in text, lack of supporting research, and no clear correlation between the things that they developed. So you understand that there are problems that are coming up. So it's a great idea to look at the situation, but is there correlation with the reality? And that's where a lot of these theories kind of fell apart. So people are postulating things, but the theory is not backing it up, or the practice is not backing up where the theory is going. So some people will talk about it. It's, it's a lot of thinking, but they're thinking in vacuums. And then you have the influence theories, and you all will recognize the Max Weber and charisma here, 1924, 1947. Influence theories has to do with the amount of influence that the leader has on followers. And this is where charisma comes in to look at the nature of and the power of that amount of influence. So Weber talked about this to describe the form of influence based not on traditional power or formal authority, but rather on the followers' perceptions that the leader is endowed with exceptional qualities. And this is where influence theory or what we talked about before in terms of charisma having problems.
Weber looked like he was a white extremist and slave owner, yes?
Well, look at the time frame.
Like Trump family.
No. Look at the time frame. Look at the years.
Yeah.
Right. This was in
the World
Wars, right? And therefore there would be heavy thinking along the lines of Nazism, and Weber is a German word, so Max Weber is a German philosopher. So, well, actually, I think he was not from Germany, but from Prague or something along those lines. You all actually do Weber's theory and stuff like that, don't you? In management.
Yeah, we did it in public sector management.
Yeah.
And some of it in management too, yeah.
Right. So this is another individual who looked back at that charisma theory coming out of the early period by and he's now again the whole issue with management theories and leadership theories is finding the ability to measure the outcomes, because that's what makes anything scientific. The fact that an experiment can be performed and the outcomes can be measured consistently time and time again. So when you do certain things a certain way, then you expect a certain outcome. And this is one of the things that they were trying to do in terms of charismatic leadership coming out of this model. So the problem with charisma is not something that necessarily exists only in the context of the person himself, but it exists in the context of how other people think they see people. And this is where charisma is very subjective, and it causes problems in terms of us being able to understand its impact, and which is again why it makes it dangerous. So again, looking at these charismatic models or charisma models, will have a problem dealing with the circumstances. So if you look at this, several theories exist and generally posit that conditions that facilitate charismatic leadership include times of crisis, times when followers are willing to challenge the status quo. So this is one of the things that you have to be careful about, because generally charismatic leaders tend to rise during periods of high levels of problems and stress. And therefore people are looking for somebody to lead them through that period. And this is what makes charismatic leadership dangerous. Now, if we think about the Hitler's situation, Hitler's rise to power came during a period when Germany was in the throes of some of the worst economic and financial ruin that they faced after World War One. And he was able to use his charismatic approach to speaking the people's language. And a lot of people likened Trump to him in terms of some of the things that he said. And because he was being, his views were popular, he was able to bring people along to do something that was against the status quo at the time. And that challenging of the status quo made him popular. So popular that they elected him chancellor for life, because they wanted to have him, take charge of the world around them. So it's an interesting thing, and a lot of people forget that about Hitler. Hitler didn't rise to power out of the power of a gun. He rose to power out of the support of people who were looking for a change in their circumstances at the time when they were perceived to be at their worst. So, and this is the danger of charismatic leadership again being displayed here. All right. And again, individual leaders are dangerous because of the amount of misuse that can and the delivery of empty dreams. So those are things for us to look at in terms of that charismatic leadership model. So then we have these theories, reciprocal leadership theories. This is in the 1970s. So this reciprocal leadership emerged that focus on the relational and reciprocal nature of leader-follower interaction. So you're going to see something here now that's going to look along the lines of something we've been talking about in terms of the relational model that we're looking at here. That this is a mutual type of thing. So the theory began to look now at the mutual goals and motivations of both the leader and follower working together. And it therefore elevates the importance of the roles of each of these individuals. So it's no longer only focused on the leader, but also starts to focus on the followers in the process, because it's important to understand that leaders don't stand alone. Leaders stand with individuals, and therefore the relationship that they developed is something that they began to look at in this reciprocal thing. So leadership is not just something that a leader does to followers. Rather, leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contributions of the participants, shares power and authority between leaders and participants, and establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among independent. Now, you notice this started up from the 1970s. So what was going on in the 1970s? What was some of the big
The Vietnam War
right
was in progress then, and
I think the Industrial Revolution too. I think that was part of it,
Sorry,
the modernization process. I think all during that time things were still happening, changes, a shift.
What was some of the biggest movements back in the 70s?
Yeah, the Black Power movement.
Right. So a lot of social thing. You had the 70s was also that time of the hippie, the love movement. Remember all of that?
That was in protest against the war, the Vietnam War.
Correct. Yes, all through the Vietnam War and stuff like that. So, understandably, I think, and now the book never said this, but I think the mood in the country was one where, we're looking at us together leading the world kind of thing, and a lot of this concept or reciprocal theories, I think, came out of that whole movement and feeling during that period of together we can change the world kind of thing. You understand that thing? Because to me that's something that and we and again, remember, at that level, at that time, the level of distrust for the traditional leadership models like Nixon and presidents around the world was at an all-time low. In fact, it began its big slide and decline. So you have, I think, the time frame reflecting itself in the theories that were developed back in that period. And I found it quite interesting because everything here is about we working together to achieve, and that a leader is simply there to facilitate those goals being accomplished. So
the environment, well, let us another example of the environment impacting the thinking.
Correct. The thinking at the time, and this is one of the things that I was getting when I was reading that section of the chapter about it. So the main theories that arose in that period was the transforming leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, which we're going to look at, and the followership theory. All of these theories are being, you all are going to examine them in some of the chapters that you are going to look at. So this theory here, the transforming leadership, was formulated. He defined transforming leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. Look at the congruence now of ethical behavior coming into the situation here now. So again, it's all going to start to speak to the fact that leaders and followers hold themselves to higher levels of moral values, such as, look at these here, higher ideals and moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, humanitarianism, not to lesser emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, and hatred. Now, understand that some leaders lead from fear, and that's what Trump did, if you all remember this. Trump used fear to gather support because he started to well, and he still does it. It's a technique that some leaders use. You scare people into supporting you because you position yourself as a solution to prevent what you most fear coming true. Whereas this leadership model here is speaking to trying to get people to get together because we value such things as our freedom, about our society being a just society, that we practice equality, and that peace is something that we want throughout the world. But again, different techniques, different people, such as we see what's happening. So transformational leadership, that was one theory. Leadership is inseparable from force. So again, this model is talking about the linkage and the relationship between the two. That makes sense so far? So all of these findings coming out started to speak about the moral implication of leadership. So prior to that, we weren't talking about the moral issues or the ethical issues. We were just looking at functionality, and we're looking at outcomes. and how it was done, not necessarily the way in which it was done. So this begins to bring the two of those concepts together. So these are some of what you would look at as being transformational leaders, because they started to speak to us being better selves, being better people. So you have JFK, Mahatma Gandhi, you should know about. This is Abraham Lincoln. This is Teddy Roosevelt. This is, anybody knows who this nun is? Just to be.
Is that Mother Teresa?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So Mother Teresa was one who aspires for us to be better selves. So, but she's actually one of the proponents of the servant leadership model. So the best way to teach leadership is to serve others. So I'm familiar with that. So these are transforming leaders who use different transformative techniques to be able to empower others to do the best out of them. So, so transforming leadership was contrasted with transactional leadership. So this is one of the topics that you all will also discuss and examine in the methodology. What is transactional versus transformational? And so you see transactional leadership as a process whereby one person takes the initiative in making contact with others for the purpose of exchanging a value. That's transactional. So it's sort of like how we deal with children in sometimes in a transactional basis at a very base level. If you do this, then you'll get this kind of thing. So there's a reward and punishment situation that you look at with that. We even do that work. If you produce more, you'll get a bonus, that type of stuff. Those kind of transactional leadership models or approaches is something that, as opposed to the transformational leadership, which is asking you to want to make those changes, which is a different element. So the theory is saying that both forms of leadership can be utilized together. That one isn't better than the other, but they're just different techniques that can be utilized to get to the end result. So, but they did posit that transactional leadership appeals to the self-interest of people, whereas transformational leadership appeals to higher ideals and moral values. So the positioning of the theories or the approaches is one that was also interesting for us to look at, because one speaks to ideals and moral values, whereas the others is about self-interest. So obviously we're going to be looking at self-interest as being the lower valued one, because that's the way we make our transactions self-interest. So if you do your homework, you'll get a cookie. That's self-interest, because now I'll do my homework because I'm going to get something sweet. But if my parents came to me and said, well, if you do your homework, you're going to learn more and become a better person. Understand? It's probably not going to be as appealing. Yeah, right. Give me another story kind of situation that we're going to talk about. But understand that there's a different approach to how we get to things done. Basically, what you have is there's some elements that you can use transactional leadership approaches, and there are other elements that you would want to utilize transformational leadership approaches. Again, I think marrying contextual situations into this, or situational into this model. So what you're going to recognize is that all of these models are going to be used in the relational model that we're going to end up with looking at. This is the servant leadership model. You're all going to look at this in more detail, at least one week. So I don't know if any of you all are familiar with the saying "stoop to conquer." You're all familiar with that?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
That's where this comes from. To be able to bring people over to your side, you have to stoop to their level, and then you will rise above them. So the servant leadership model begins viewing the leader first to be a servant of those of the people that they have to serve. So the leader is there to serve the membership. The servant, through focus on the primary needs of others and the organization, then transforms himself or herself into a leader. So the idea here is that the leader leads the way through example by serving as a catalyst and serving the others to get them to that point. So that's the servant leadership model. All play a significant. So you'd see that this model is one that was developed again during the same period, and different people wrote about it again, and it becomes an important approach to leadership. And again, as I said, one of the groups is going to be dealing with the servant leadership model. All right, so this is important here. The biggest difference between a servant leader and a person who wants to lead an organization is that the servant leader the servant leaders of putting the needs of others before his own. So the idea is that the servant leader puts people's motives before his own. It's a sort of selfless approach, and that's why I said Mother Teresa is a good example of that, because you have to put the goals and objectives of the person who you're serving or you are leading them. You have to put their goals in front of yours and in front of the organization. So interesting approach to how to get things done. All right.
That's something you see. Traditionally you see parents doing as well in the home. They put the needs of the children
before theirs,
above theirs.
Yeah, but sometimes what you find happening though with that is that some children are unable to see that aspect, that they put that thing. So that's not a bad comparison, because it can be from the point of view of benevolent behavior. All right, so then we have the followership model, and this followership model in leadership literature as sheep. So followers were viewed in leadership literature as sheep in need of a leader. So this is the traditional approach to how they viewed followers. This gentleman here, Kelly, redefined followers and leadership and rejected that industrial model in which leaders are superior to followers, but defined the role of leaders and followers as having equally important but different activities. And followership is going to be something that we're going to be. We talked about it already before. The 5 follower patterns: alienated followers, sheep, yes, people, survivors, and so on. And we talked. I think I showed you all this model in the previous element. Effective followers share these qualities. They manage themselves. They're committed to the organization. They build their competence. So he started to identify all the different qualities that followership will do, and began to look at the importance of the leader and the followers working with each other to get things done in the appropriate time frame. So you're going to see this model becoming coming up during this period of time, where again it's more along the lines of transformational, because now you're recognizing the importance of, in order for you to get something done, you have to have effective people in your organization, and effective followers are required to be able to get things done. So in order to do that, you have to empower them and provide the tools they need to get your organization. That's sort of like some of the approaches that they're looking at now. And so, for example, the Commissioner of Police requires that he has to be able to perform well in his job. But how is he going to do that? He has to do that by getting the guys who are below him the tools necessary and the whatever they need to be able to get their job done. Because it's only if they get their job done can he get his goals accomplished, or the goals of the organization that he's been given to deal with. So that reciprocal relationship between leadership and followership is an important ambit that any leader is going to have to look at, because without the cooperation of the people that make up your organization, you're not going to get anything. If you alienate those individuals, then everything is going to be you're going to lose everything. That actually speaks to these people here. If you alienate your followership, then you're going to end up in a situation where you're not going to get what you need done because nobody's going to listen to you. Sheep are just going to do nothing unless you push them to do it. Yes, people, dangerous set of people. Survivors are those people that well, you're all familiar with that. People who just kind of like in the middle where they fall into the situation where they are all over the place. But what you really want to do is to get effective followers. Now you're going to do that by being able to motivate them to want to be in this area here, empowered to be able to contribute to the goals and objectives of the organization. All right. So this is another model. Right. So you have another model coming up here, the industrial paradigm model, and this had to do 91 with the second industrial revolution coming up. Yeah, people talking about this here. A lot of talk about alienation and stuff coming up with this. Structural functionalist, management oriented, personality and focus on only the leader. Goal achievement dominated, self-interest and individualistic and outlook, male oriented. So you realize that the leadership theory in the 20th century really was looked at like this, and I like the way it just kind of ripped through everything. Linear, quantitative, scientific, and language. And if you've ever read some of those older leadership model textbooks, you'd see a lot of Venn diagrams of somebody wanted to ask something? All right, so Ross was in 1993 looking at a transformational approach to the view of leadership, looked at the reciprocal theories, and started to develop his own thinking of integrating all of those useful elements of the framework. So in other words, he took what was useful from a lot of other things and started to develop other theories. So I'm gonna have to run through this a little quickly. But again, you guys can go through this on your own because a lot of this is going to impact upon the model that we're going to be looking at. So, so again, what you have here is sort of like a broadening of the concept of the leadership models and bringing into focus the need to bring in the ethical moral dilemma that is going to be faced with this thing. So. Then we have the chaos theory that's going to come up now, which is which speaks to this situation where a lot of the things that we learn to the perspective that things are nice and neat, but the reality is that things are messy. So we're going to start to see the chaos theory start to come into this situation as well. A world filled with chaos, but one in which chaos is viewed as something to be embraced rather than feared. So when we say the word, I mean, chaos is such a hot word. So when you talk about chaos, it talks about confusion and things breaking down and whatnot. But the reality is that we live in a situation where everything changes on a whim. All right, and therefore we have to be able to navigate through those things by being dynamic in our approach. So that's why the chaos theories started to emerge in the model. So that in essence, what they're trying to say is leadership has to be able to be dynamic enough to deal with the chaotic behavior that takes place in all of the organizations outside. I mean, think about it from nobody was predicting this whole situation with the pandemic and then having to make changes. Leadership have to make adjustments and changes in relation to this as well. So you can see, excuse me, you can see that this theory, this chaos theory element, is something that will be useful to look at, especially when we're looking at a world that is developing or changing based upon the circumstances that it faces. So, and we're still dealing with issues with that. All right. So you could go through this here and look at how that theory started to look at things, and then there is an element of systems theory that goes with this. Systems theory, you all did MIS? Most of you all did MIS already, right? And you all should have come across some systems theory there too, as well. It's importance of developing systems. All right. So you can go through this and look at this here and see where you're going with chaos theory. So again, the evolution here now is coming, and the systems theory came up really at the end of the 1990s. And what you develop is to deal with the chaos is more a fluid system of dealing with things. An approach to deal with things that you're going to be looking at in terms of these theories that come up. The problem with these theories, though, is that they are vague. All right, and they sometimes become more difficult for you to actually conceptualize. Because of the fact that they're dealing with non-measurable metrics or elements. So you're dealing with people's norms and values, you're dealing with emotions, and you have to deal with those things. All right. So that's the. Then you have this here. Authentic leadership is one of the last theory models or models I'm going to come up with. It starts with authentic people are the center of authentic leadership. So, what do they mean by authentic people? And therefore, by extension, what is authentic leadership? Authentic leadership, this is how it's defined here: positive psychology, transformational leadership, and moral and ethical leadership. And the authentic leader is someone who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral or ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. So that's what this definition is. This is 2003. So the authentic leadership. This is where the discussion arrived at now, based upon that. So that you have authentic leadership as those people who are coming as real individuals, honest and upfront with what they're dealing with and acting in relation to those things and being transparent. Now that's a difficulty here we could talk about in terms of being authentic leadership. This is a high moral values that you're going to be placing on the nature of leadership. So this is the latter part of the models that are coming up in there. And of course, it focuses on the importance of all. So you should see, as they come up with something, they harken back to older models to pull what was useful out of them, and therefore you have the relational issue that comes up with it in relation to that. Authentic leaders and followers are character. This is the relationship there. Be transparent, openness and trust, guidance towards worthy objectives, and an emphasis on follower development. So this is the empowerment elements that they will start to hark on in other or recent models that we've been looking at. I think there was a book I was looking at called The Leadership Challenge that spoke to this a lot, about empowering people as a leader to be able to perform their functions by giving them what was necessary to do what they had to do and setting an example and leading by example. So these are the elements of authentic leadership that they try to deal with or bring to bear in this particular model. All right. So authentic leaders are not fake; they're original. That kind of stuff. These are the attributes that they're looking at for somebody to be authentic, and that's important for us to pay attention to. All right. So authentic leaders can use any form of leadership style um, at different times. So because you can't force to be something you're not. And that's what they're saying here. An authentic leader, if they're an authoritarian, it doesn't mean that they behave like an animal all the time or like a beast. But they ought to stick with what they are or who they are, kind of thing. So be authentic to who they are. So they can't pretend to be something they're not. That therefore negates the fact that they can be a authentic leader. They can't be um, who you're not and still be authentic in terms of your leadership. All right. And of course, again, here, authentic leadership brings to bear the whole situation of ethical values and, of course, understanding that the relationship between yourself and your followers is critical. Um, all right. So that brings us to this non transformational. See any other model came up with this, but a while since I looked at this. Again, so we're kind of summarizing here. So here you're looking at the evolution of the different theories that came up in terms of the models that they looked at um, before they started to arrive at the next one here, which I'm gonna have to leave for you guys to do. It's 3:39 already. Um, this chapter 3 presents the relational model of leadership. And this one I'm going to ask you all to focus your attention on this one here, because it is the model that the course is all developed on. So I think you need to understand this. Um, Leadership as a relational ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive things. Now, remember, this is the model that we're going to focus our attention on, and every chapter that you do is going to examine one of the elements that you all are going to be looking at. So everything in here is sort of like what's what I want to say is like the entire model explained in some level of introduction, and then the rest you all are going to be doing chapter by chapter. All right. So unfortunately, all right. So this is the whole thing here that you're going to be looking at: inclusive, process, power, purpose, ethical. This is the relationship leadership model that we are going to be engaged in doing a lot of evaluation. Um, the chapters on ethics is actually chapter 5. Um, Understanding and purpose comes from chapters 3 and 4, as understanding self and others and so on. Empowering and whatnot comes on later on as we begin to go through the model. All right. So I need you all to probably go through this with some more and try and understand it a little bit. And you'd start to, as you start to go through this model, you'll start to see where the context of having looked at the previous chapter, which looked at the various models that existed before, and how we ended up at this model here, and what they're hoping to do with this particular model. So the knowing themselves and knowing others and the whole process, you all will be doing that in more detail as we move through um, the chapters, and hopefully we are ready for that. So first group, right, so I'm going to leave this here. Guys, go through this. This one was long as well, and it's because of the amount of content that's available in this chapter. So let me ask you all a question. You all want to, if we look at the presentation schedule, We have supposedly Nigel and Alexander already supposed to present next week. Yes? Do you want me to go to chapter 3?
No, sir, not next week. Next week is a holiday. The following week.
Oh, right. Okay, I forgot that. I saw the gap there and I was wondering. Yes, next week is our holiday. All right.
Sixth.
I think there's something I can do. Maybe what I can do is I can record a session about the third chapter, put it up for you guys to review, and then on the 6th we can get cracking with your presentation. Audi, how are you guys preparing? How are you guys going? Is Nigel or Audi there?
Yes. Right now I'm doing the some of the legwork in terms of reading up the chapter and trying to sort out what we need to present actually.
All right. What about Bobby and Silverton?
Yeah, we're doing the same thing. We reading the chapter and trying to put things in perspective.
All right. So one of the things that I'd like you all to bring to bear on it is, if you can, bring to bear on your discussions as much of your own experiences as possible, because some of the examples in the textbook, they tend to be too Americanized. So if you can bring your own take on things, then it will help probably for people to understand it a little better. That make sense?
Makes sense. Do we need to do PowerPoint?
It'll be useful for focus. And also I need some sort of evidence of your presentation. I will be recording it, but it usually would be helpful for that purpose as well.
Very well, sir.
It's up to you guys. And what were you thinking as an alternative?
I was more thinking like a handout, do a note and send it out to everybody. And
Well, handouts can be a little distracting, which is why I think it might be better for you to use PowerPoint to be able to guide us through your presentation. Kind of
okay.
Thing. Right? Okay.
All right.
I don't want to keep you all much longer. I know we started a little late. And there'll be no sense for me to go through that third unit, third chapter immediately this evening. And then I have another class in a little while as well. Anybody has any questions they want to ask about what they looked at so far?
I have a question, Mr. Bisu. It has to do with our presentation. We could do a YouTube video and post it. Could we do that?
No, you need to do a live presentation.
Pardon?
You need to do a live presentation. When you say do a YouTube video and post it, what are you planning to do?
No, a pre-recorded presentation, and you could run it. We were thinking that, I don't know, but the live presentation would not be a problem.
Well, he meant audio PowerPoint too. Where you speak on the audio and the PowerPoint will just run the slide.
Yeah. The danger with that is
discussion.
Because remember, you're supposed to engage in discussion with the class. If you do a recording, then you
agree with that. I agree.
Problem with that. You wouldn't be able to open questions up and that kind of stuff for people to talk to you. That's
Okay.
I mean, if you want to use YouTube videos and stuff to support ideas or illustrate concepts, that's not a problem. But if you record your entire thing, the only reason why that could happen is maybe somebody's not available on that day and they record their bit of the presentation. That is a possibility, but not the entire presentation. I wouldn't recommend that.
No problem.
Excuse sir.
Yes, Dale.
Yeah. Would it be like now where we are all on Google Meet and you will be taping us when that time comes as we present our
We are recording right now, so yes.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you, sir.
All right. Any other questions, guys?
Mr. Lishu, I observed that your presentations, these slides, the PowerPoint presentations, the slides is approximately over 100.
Yeah, I don't think you need to. The reason why I left mine so detailed is because I suspected that a lot of people would not read the textbook.
Okay, so in terms of the group presentation, is
You
there a
don't have
limit
to.
number that you're looking at, or?
I would suggest that you try to don't exceed an hour with your presentation, because you're doing 2 presentations per session, so an hour should be about max time, and we will be taking a break between presentations as well, to give people an opportunity to stretch a little bit.
And from your experience, Mr. Bishu, the average amount of slides would
It
is like
varies.
how much?
It varies depending upon your style, um, and the amount of information you choose to represent on your slide. Because my slides are more, or I should say, my presentations are more intense in terms of I'm trying to give you as much information as possible without me being available. So you see, there's a difference when you have my slides are not designed for presenting. My slides are for knowledge dissemination without video, without audio with it. You understand? If they were designed for presentation purposes, there'll be a lot less content on the slide itself. Making sense? Where the content will come from the audio feed that goes with it, and the visual will just will support it. You all understand that concept, right? You all did COM 118, right?
Yeah.
So remember, the 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 presentation aid is to support the presenter. The reason why my slides have so much data on it is because there was no presenter. It's just a slide that tries to extract the data from the textbook into a form that people can look at in a more visual manner. You notice that I don't spend a lot of time on every slide. It's just a couple of the slides I need to go through with you as we're going through the content. If I had built a different presentation, I'd have more graphics, more other things like that, so that makes it more visually interesting for the audio. Okay, so your slides, what you want to do is not worry about the amount of slides, but worry about how much time you're taking, because you can in 1 hour show a lot of slides, but it depends upon your ability to be able to get those slides presented to the class, and also afford the opportunity for them to ask questions. But again, the chapters that you all are looking at are a lot shorter than the chapters that I did. There's some chapters that are going to be pretty long, and therefore we expect that they may go over an hour a little bit, but it's not the majority of chapters. All right? Make sense so far? Everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions you want to ask? So next week we're off again, and then the week after we are back on for the first set of presentations. Cool. I'll try to do an audio recording to go with the 3rd chapter and load it onto the classroom so that you guys can go through it if you want. Right? But again, that presentation is primarily going to be outlining the relational, well, not primary, it is outlining the relational leadership model for you to understand what's happening across the board. All right? We good there, guys?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
All right. Any questions? More questions? All right. Well, if there are no more questions, let's call it Jorge for the evening. And I'll see you all next week. Hopefully, we wouldn't have any more disasters with the website and stuff like that, but we'll see how it goes. All right. Okay. Good evening, guys. Get some rest. Nice.
Okay.
I like the discussion we had today. It was good. Just wish I had more time to go through the next chapter with you guys. But please go through the chapter on your own if you can. I will, as I said, try to put up something that will assist with that. Okay. Good evening, guys, and I'll see Miss McIntyre in the next class later on. All right?
Okay, sir. Take care.
Okay, guys.
You're right, sir.
Nice.
Thanks, Peter.